Lynell George is an award-winning LA-based journalist, essayist, and author. Her work has appeared widely in publications, including the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, Sierra, Oxford American, and Alta, a journal of Alta, California. Vincent Valdez blends large representational paintings, the scale of which recall Western traditions of history paintings, as well as mural paintings and cinema, with contemporary subject matter. He focuses on subjects that explore his observations and experiences of life in the 21st century. The results are powerful images of American identity that confront injustice and inequity while imbuing his subjects with empathy and humanity. A recipient of the Latinx Artist Fellowship in 2022, Joan Mitchell Fellowship in 2016, as well as residencies at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2005, the Vermont Studio Center, 2011, and the Ariane Press King Residency in 2023. He currently lives and works between Houston and Los Angeles. We have him here right now. And his work has been featured in exhibitions at major museums, such as the Crystal Bridges Museum, Mass MoCA, National Portrait Gallery, and the Smithsonian Museum of American Art. Ry Cooder is a musician, songwriter, film score composer, record producer, and writer. I have been given a special note of introduction to share. I'll do my best to share it. Hello, neighbors and friends. I'm Cash Buck, here to say I've been knowing Ry Cooder good all these many years. He's tried hard to be a good honky-tonk musician, and I think he has finally made it. And I have known some of the best. No one man or woman, let's be fair, can claim to be king of the honky-tonks, although Winton Stewart comes awful close, but Ry has certainly got a seat at that at the red Naugahyde table. That's a tough one to say. I think you'll find he's a good man in a tight spot, or my name ain't Cash R. Buck. In addition to these words of Cash Buck, we can also say that Cooder is one of the coolest people alive, having played with Captain Beefheart and his magic band, Taj Mahal, and the Rolling Stones, scored soundtracks for Wim Wenders and Walter Hill, and served as a producer for a small project you might have heard of called the Buena Vista Social Club. So please join me all in welcoming this glorious panel.
Cash came in. He just made it. Oh, wow. I am so happy to be in conversation. There was a period of time, I think, over 3 years or more, I was probably talking to both of you at least once a week, a couple times a week, or more. I'm looking forward to kind of resurrecting, that past and seeing where we are now. Ry, the very first phone call I had with you, I was sitting at my desk at the LA Times and my phone rang and I pick it up and on the other end, I said, Lynell George, Los Angeles Times, and I go, this is Ry Cooder. I thought somebody was punking me. I turned around, looked around, but no, he kept talking. And at that point, it was to talk to me a little bit about, we had a mutual friend, writer friend, who had suggested that I might want to do a feature about your record. And instead of my writer friend giving me Ry's number, Ry called me. So he turned the tables. And in that very first conversation, as he was talking about the research he was doing for Chavez Ravine, the research he was doing for Chavez Ravine, he was talking about promotion and thinking ahead, which is why he was talking to me. And he mentioned an ice cream truck back then, in that very first conversation, that was what, 2004, probably? Anyway, and the ice cream truck stayed with me. He was looking for a good humor style, or a good humor old truck. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that idea nested and what you had hoped?
Sure. Well, I worked on the record for 3 years with people, musicians, singers, who had grown up in the East LA music scene. I could talk a long time about that, but the point being that it was not something that had been sung about. Chavez Ravine, the story. We're going to sit here and assume that everybody is somehow familiar with events, post-war events up there in the ravine, which is now Dodger Stadium. So rather than take too much time to go into all the details, so I have to kind of think that you folks, that you good people know something about this. We'll get a little bit into it. Anyway, so I thought, since Lalo Guerrero, Don Tosti, of course the Arvizu sisters, and others, Little Willie G of the Midnighters, were still around. Lalo was pretty old, Tosti was pretty old, but they were there. And I thought, now's the time to do this. You know, if we're gonna, I've spent so much time missing out on, you miss people that you didn't call them that day. The next thing you know, they've passed on. And it's a lesson you have to learn, so don't wait. So I got going on this record. And then it occurred to me that it would be a great visual. I'd seen so many photographs, Don Normark book in particular, of the ravine, of the events, people being evicted, the bulldozers coming over and smashing up everything, and all kinds of stuff like that. Even in films, there's films, feature films that happen to be shot up there. Very beautiful, now totally paved over. So I thought, this could be a visual story, a narrative, and a painting perhaps. But then I thought, if it's a painting, it's in somebody's house, maybe, and no one sees it. If it's a mural on a building, it gets damaged, or a condo goes up, and no one gets to see it. And then I thought about lowrider art, lowrider cars in Los Angeles, and all the beautiful paint work that's done on those cars very often. But then I thought, well, a car is a small thing. There's not enough room. There's not enough square inches. Then I thought about a milk truck, but they're not much fun to look at. They're just boxes, and there's no shape, and it's not interesting. Then, of course, it was obvious to me that the good humor truck was the one, because it went everywhere, every neighborhood. Doesn't matter, rich or poor, race, color, or creed, the good humor truck came there, including in Chavez Ravine. And then I thought, okay, great, terrific, I'll just get one. Like, get this truck, and somebody will paint it. Paint the story, paint the ideas and the people. There's many faces that are known. J. Edgar Hoover, of course, Fritz Burns, the developer, O'Malley, and so forth. And the beauty of the place before the stadium was built, the little streets, the flower beds, the houses, goats tethered over here, so beautiful, I think. But of course, there wasn't any ice cream trucks. They'd all been crushed after Good Humor folded, and there was no more Good Humor, and then the trucks were all flattened out. So I went to Willie G and I said, we're gonna have to make one, Willie. What do I do? How do I get into this kind of thing? A lowrider ice cream truck. He said, oh, you go talk to the Ruelas brothers, and they'll take care of you. I said, okay, great, perfect, set me up. Where's the phone number? Who do I talk to? And we went on from there, and that's a story. At the same time, the artwork itself, of course, was a key thing, right? So I started reading books and looking at art and art books and stuff, and it was many styles. with themes and interesting in East LA artwork and elsewhere in other cities, because it had to have a flavor, I thought, but then it needed to be recognizable. If you wanted Walter O'Malley, you had to know that's him. And if you were going to see the little house, it had to be just right. You know, the wood and the doors and the goat is here. And it had to be just really good. So you could feel it, you know. It's not enough to just be mechanical, and photographs are fun, but if it's in color and it's painted, then it has some kind of mood, you know. The mood is the thing.
Right.
So I asked around, and I talked to this artist here in Los Angeles named Ruben Ortiz Torres. And I met him and talked to him. He's a sort of conceptual art guy. And he said, there's only one person in the world today that can do what it is you're really talking about here. I said, great, hook me up, you know, what do I do? So he's a kid, he lives down in San Antonio, Texas. He's hard to find, though. He doesn't answer his phone much, and he's, you know, and you may have problems there. So he gave me the number of a couple of people, friends of Vincent's, and Vincent's telephone number. And I started by calling Vincent on the phone. And there was like beep. All it did was beep. No message, no voice message.
Elusive.
I said, well, this is Ry Cooder, and I'm in Los Angeles, and I have an idea, and I'd like to talk to you. I wish you would call me back, and here's my telephone number. Well, I mean, what am I going to say? I can't describe this idea over the phone. No response. The whole time went by, weeks, and I called again. You know, you heard from me before. I'm asking again, and it's the same guy, and it's me, and it's okay, you know, what I'm asking about. You don't have to worry about this. No problem here. I'm not going to cause trouble. Then I called his friends. They hadn't seen him. Now, 6 months went by. And I thought, and the truck was, to speed forward in the story here, the truck was in progress at that point. It was taking shape. We had cut up this, the brothers had a 53 Chevy 3-window job in the yard, and they sold it to me, and we proceeded to cut it up and make an ice cream truck. You had to make it, kind of like what Good Humor had done.
Right. Now
So-
I wanna jump in for a minute, because I wanna ask Vincent.
Oh, right, sure. Ask
Vincent. So what was going on? Were you thinking somebody was punking you too? Is that
If that's a true story.
Yeah.
You know, I was, I must have been 27, 28 years old at that time. And I was working on my very first museum show. And so 1,000% of my focus every day was on this exhibition. And every night I'd walk up, you know, I used to live up in a loft above the studio. I'd walk upstairs at midnight, and back in the day it was answering machines, so that thing was beeping. And day after day, there was this weird guy leaving me these long messages. Hi, my name is Ry Cooder. Please call me back. Well, months went by. It is a true story. The night of the opening at the museum, I stumble back, plop on my couch, and I remember that moment as vividly as if it was yesterday. You know, this is 2003 or 4. And I'm staring at the wall, and I remember asking myself, what am I going to do next? How do I top this? Oh, there's this weird guy on the machine. I'm going to call him. So I picked up the phone, and I called him. I didn't know any better. I didn't know who he was. And he answers, and I'll never forget that voice, and he laughs. Oh, God, I was just about to give up on you, but I didn't. I'm glad you called me. So here's what I need from you. And he just goes off on this rant about this story that I had no idea about, like much of our American history that is buried and untaught, unknown, forgotten. And immediately after that, by the end of that very first phone conversation, before even discussing details, how this thing was going to be created, if it was even possible, how much I was going to, if I was going to even get paid, I said, I'm in. Count me in.
So you said yes during that conversation.
I'm in.
Wow.
Because for me, what really resonated was not only the idea, the interesting concept that he had. I thought he was completely insane, but I thought that I was able to match his insanity in terms of challenging yourself to tackle challenging subjects.
Right.
And at that time in 2004, it wasn't so much, of course, a part of it was the historical aspect of this narrative, of this Los Angeles tale. But what really struck a chord with me was the idea about how much the past resonated in the present.
Yes.
And that was my ambition. My intention was
Yes.
I was immediately reminded of my father telling me a story, as a child about old Highway 90 in San Antonio. And how one day him and his family came home from after church or something on Sunday, and his father opened an envelope that was placed on his door, and it was another tale of eminent domain. Your property is in our way. You need to move out of this property so we can build the first highway in San Antonio. And I couldn't help but think about a tale in my own lifetime, 10 years prior to 2004. The sacred San Antonio Spurs and the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, and how the Aztlán, the Victoria courts were through the use of eminent domain,
Right.
were paved over, and that's where Alamo Dome sits today. Where the Spurs played for 2 years and said, we don't like this stadium, we're moving again.
Moving. Right.
So I was really fired up by the potential opportunity to remind a younger audience how these tales of greed, corruption, systemic injustice, and so forth still ring so true in in 21st century contemporary America.
Absolutely. So after this, when you decided in this, moment to say yes, after you hung up the phone, did you realize what you were getting yourself into, and how quickly did you come to LA and meet up? And
well, that was a whole other story.
that was a whole other, okay.
I think that it must have been about a month or two later that Ry said, well, I'm going to bring you up here to Los Angeles. And I had already been coming out here to work with self-help graphics and a few other, ties to the city. And he flew me out here. The first stop was Philippe's. And
right.
after having a French dip, he took me and drove me up to Dodger Stadium and drove me around the neighborhoods, and it was really kind of a silent drive. I was taking it all in. I went out to meet Fernando Ruelas and Julio,
Oh, wonderful.
and saw the truck for the first time.
Okay.
And then it really hit home. Oh shit!
What you had said yes to.
What did I just agree to? I had never attempted to do anything like that. I didn't even know. I'm a painter in the studio working with oil paints.
Right.
And I had told Ry in that first phone call, or maybe that first meeting, oh, no problem. We can do this in oil paints on metal. I'll figure it out, and it'll take me. And he asked me about how long is this going to take, Vincent? No problem, 4 to 6 months, in and out.
And it took you, 2 years?
2 years later,
Yeah.
I put the finishing touches.
Yeah.
But it had to be done in oil paints because I was approaching it the same way that I would approach anything else in the studio.
Right.
And so I would say that somewhere around this phase where you're seeing on the screens in front of you is really where it starts to pick up a lot of momentum and speed. And then I start to really realize what the task that I had before me. I got so immediately lost, not only in the actual painting process, but in the research. And I think that that's where this strong, not only friendship, but collaborative union between Ry and I as colleagues really began to grow into something very strong, like a strong bond. I mean, for me, I'm 29, 30 years old, but there's not many other people on the planet Earth that I can sit and have a 30-minute conversation with about HUAC committees and J. Edgar Hoover.
Right.
And so Ry would show up every Friday in the first few months, and he would sit with me in the studio, and we would look at the progress, and he would bring me a pile of records or books, and I loved it. It was the greatest experience for me at that moment because I was so hungry,
Right.
and he was nurturing, it was nourishment. He was providing me with this visual references and materials, but it was like, I always thought of him as a walking encyclopedia.
Right.
I was learning so much from him. For me, that was a rare thing.
In the gallery, you'll see, which was so wonderful to look at with you, some of the letters that Ry wrote to Vincent, early sketches. You see their collaboration starting on the page, both in words and your sketches. So beautiful. What were some of the things that you thought were really important for Vincent to see, and that you were sending him? And what were some of the research you were getting lost in?
Didn't we sit and look at movies? Crisscross, that's one of the best ones.
Crisscross, yeah.
Because we can't see LA this way, you know. We're talking about such a different time. It's unbelievable, really. I mean, Jesus. But the films are there, the ones from the post-war time. Crisscross is a great one. Crime Wave with Sterling Hayden. Go watch that. Fantastic. In the streets, and here comes the night, and the car comes around the corner, and then there's the trees. The Ring, 1951 or 2, yep. This boxing story that takes place up there. Little boxing guy training goes jogging and down the roads. And the Don Normark book, of course, is a big deal. And that's a great story, too. So I had all this stuff in the house because I was interested in maps, you know. I even had the, plan for Chavez Ravine that had, the public housing plan that they had gotten together, Neutra and some of these guys, Schindler and all these guys. We're going to build these skyscrapers and people will love it. There'll be 100 floors up. They're just going to love that. Or where they're going to put their goats, you know. And how they're going to live in 100 floors up. I mean, it was outrageous. So I found these things in bookstores and estate sales and whatnot. So I said, here, Vincent, look. You just read this. I've marked the pages, and now you look at this. But we had so much fun doing it, right? Yeah. I mean, it was...
Oh, yeah. I mean,
to think that this was actually going to result in this truck, though, I have to say, right now, it's a miracle that it exists. Yeah. You know, making records is one thing. You can count, somebody counts off, somebody is take us to the bridge, there's an intro, there's an outro. It's pretty straightforward, if you're any good at it, I mean. But making this is unexampled. I mean, there is no such thing, right? But once it started, it go into colors.
Right.
Oh, boy. So I used to love it. I go in, I'm going to go see Vincent today. We're going to look at this. Oh, my God. Here it is. You could feel it, you know, it coming at you. You could walk into it, almost. That would have been nice to be able to do. But we can't, obviously. Can't go back, you know. You can never go back. So, but this was pretty close. Pretty thrilling. It's been 20 years. I haven't seen it in 12 years. Yeah. There it is. Go see it.
Go look at it.
Yeah, check it out.
I think for me, one of the more memorable, some of the more memorable materials and resources that Ry provided me was stacks of vinyl records he'd bring. Like these amazing, even like Texas Conjunto musicians that I hadn't heard of. And I had a little turntable in the studio, and he said, listen to this. But he knew the endless amount of hours and time that I was spending alone in the studio. Yes. And so the company was the music. Yes. But I think that's I don't know that I could have accepted agreed to do a project like this, had I not found some kind of relationship to the way that Ry was working. And so when I was listening to Ry's albums like Chavez Ravine and others, that was the thing that really struck a chord with me, was the obsession with detail, the minute detail, not only to make it sound something, just like it's not enough to make an image look good. It's not enough. It's never enough. Right. But you have to take the viewer there. Right. You have to transport them so deeply into this world that they forget that line between what is real, what is imaginative, is blurred forever. That line between what is past and what is present is completely dissolved. So down to the types of soil, the foliage, up in that region of Elysian Park, I was going there. I began driving there on my own, and I would just sit and study. houses that looked like they might have resembled some of the older houses that were no longer standing, in neighborhoods of Bishop, Palo Verde, La Loma, and then I would run back to the studio, and I would try to imagine my own self walking in this world, and that's where the clock just kept, disappearing. But I gotta say, after 2 years of working on this one project, never once did Ry walk in and say, "Hurry up." Never. He probably should have and could have, but I always deeply respected that, and I recognized it, even though I never spoke about it. But he never said to hurry up. Wow. He always trusted in me that he'll figure it out at some point. And I remember the day that I finished, I asked you, Ry, did you think you lost me? And he said, well, Vincent, maybe once or twice there, I thought you were gone.
I want to pick up on that, but I really, later, but I really wanted to speak to this idea of mood that you brought up and what you just articulated, which I think exists in both the album and both in the truck. And one of the things that every time I look at that truck, I am struck by how vividly, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles, the way you capture color, the sky, the subtleties of that. As I walk around that truck, it just makes me start to daydream. I go all kinds of places. You just got that so right. Same thing with the record. It's like moving through a neighborhood. And so I hear these voices, about like, don't honk the horn, wrap the pipes. These things that, the way music comes through your window when you walk through a neighborhood. That's how you can feel the city changing. You both were working on different levels, but communicating the same thing. And it just so, to me, and it brought these neighborhoods back individually. You could see them, the people, it's the memorial, it's paying homage. So I'm so glad you both took the time you needed, because you gave that back to us, the history back to us. Back to problem solving. Because the Dukes had to do a lot of problem solving to create an ice cream truck. You're trying to figure out, how do I work oil on metal? So what can you talk a little bit about, for you, what was it like trying to figure out how to make this work? You promised him, I'm gonna make this work. How did you figure this out?
The very first studies, or samples that are on display in the exhibition, I would take these little metal samples from the Dukes that they would hand to me, and I would run back to the studio and hand paint in oil, and I immediately could tell it's no problem. Shouldn't be any kind of real challenge here. It wasn't until I began actually applying the very first layers of oil paint onto the surface of the body of the truck that I hit my very first brick wall, and I thought, oh wow, I didn't see it. I didn't think about the dimensionality of the body of those hubs that go from a standing surface, flatten around the top of the tire and back down. Well, it completely distorted my perspective. It severed my perspective and composition tremendously. It's such a minor portion. It's probably, those hubs are about 6 to 8 inches wide, but it really was a major curveball. And so I became absolutely obsessive about making sure, whether you stand on a ladder looking down at the ice cream truck, whether you are standing on the floor eye level with the truck, if you lay down on the floor and look at it from a grounds up view, I made sure that every single angle of every perspective and every object connects and is never disconnected again. But that, really delayed me about a month or two, and then I became so excited about that challenge. after that, after I was able to break free and figure that portion out, then, it really was just a matter of trying to construct the framework of this narrative and to find some way to complete it, to end it. I never knew the ending. So one more thing, if you notice when you first approach the truck on the driver's side, to the back, to the passenger side, and then to the front of the hood again, it all takes place from sunrise to sunset.
Yes.
It's 24 hours. So it becomes, time is transcended.
Right.
But that LA nuclear sunrise, I'm from Texas, so the sky is everything, that golden sun. Then I come out west and I see colors that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
Very different from Texas, but like Texas, that open, endless sky.
Right.
And then I read in some of the material that Ry was providing me how gasoline back then was not unleaded, right? It was leaded. Oh, yeah. And so it made for these fantastic but very toxic sunsets and sunrises.
When you were talking about this 24 hours of walking around the truck, one thing I do remember when we sat down to do our interview, you were very adamant about you did not want to do a chronological history, although we're walking around in time, when you were thinking about an arc, how did you decide you were going to put those puzzle pieces together about what we were seeing, what a viewer was going to see as they moved around that truck?
I mean, it's absolutely impossible. I don't consider myself a history painter, and it's impossible to include every detail and footnote, historically speaking. And so that was never the goal.
Right.
The goal was to try to create for the viewer a dream sequence.
Yeah.
It's a distant memory in the foggy mirage and haze of time, but it's there. It's still present. It's breathing. It's pulsating. It lives.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted the viewer to feel. I just wanted to keep you interested long enough in a moment of zero attention spans to make you curious enough, interested enough to go and find out and dig for yourself.
Right. So you were coming in once a week and looking. What were your thoughts as you were watching it come together, his version?
I saw that it was exactly what I had hoped it could be. Vincent, for me, is like the latter-day George Wesley Bellows, if you remember him, the shag at Starkey's. Sort of jumps off the page at you. If you look at the Kill the Pachuco Bastard painting that's in there, in the room in there, which is the one that I saw in a book, and that Ruben Ortiz Torres said, "Hey, look, here's this kid. He painted this." I said, "Oh yeah, all right. Now we can do this, I don't know how long it's going to take, doesn't matter. I had some idea that the truck would be done and the record would be done, and wouldn't that be great? And then I realized, this is going to take a long time, but it's incredible that the pace of it is great. Every time I went down there to see Vincent, see the truck, something had been added, some beautiful new thing I hadn't anticipated. Sunset, or you're looking at the night, the eviction.
Yeah.
I hadn't known, how he was really going to go about it. We had leaded in the fenders to the body so there were no gaps, so that he could just paint could be there. It wouldn't be a seam, and so forth, making it as smooth as possible. But of course, it's not a flat painting, like he says. So anyway, I just loved doing it, loved seeing it. So it didn't matter to me. I don't care how long this takes, and I can just go on forever. Just keep doing it. I'm having a ball. I was tired after making the record. The record took 3 years. I was tired. So this was fun to drive over to Boyle Heights and get a taco and sit there and watch him. Didn't mind me watching. It was fantastic. I mean, it's masterful, of course.
Of course.
And the little brushes, little tiny brushes.
I know Vincent, I remember one point when I had come over to visit you, and this is after the initial 8-month deadline had passed, and then another deadline passed, and you talked about feeling like you were being haunted by this truck. He was living with this truck. He was sleeping in the same space with this truck. Living in your 1,700 square foot studio. The roommate that just was not going to comply. Exactly. And I have to read this part of the story because I hadn't reread the story since I'd written it. Vincent went down the rabbit hole. The release of the album came and went. The anniversary of the release did too. And Valdez kept working, adding details, painting fonts to match old documents, even precisely mimicking their hues. Quote, it has to feel like the colors of the album. It had to feel like a Duke's car. And it had to be my work. I've always had this tug of war with my work, not just the subject, but the process. You see the fight in it. And that really says so much about you. And I saw it in you when we would sit and talk. What is it like to look at that car now after that very close relationship and feeling all those things and it pulled so much out of you? What is it like to look at it now?
I glance at that car and I know exactly where all my hair went. That's for sure. You know, it's an amazing thing to be able to create in the studio, and the majority of these things, I can't stand them by the time that they are completed, and I don't want to see them for a long time. Yeah. It takes me a long while to be able to stand in front of my work and not have to flinch or think about what I should have done better. But it's like seeing an old friend. It's like seeing an old family member, a part of you that you know, I had not seen Ry, or I had not seen for over 8 or 10 years, because it had been in storage. Correct?
Oh, you hadn't seen the truck.
The truck, yes. Yeah, no, not you.
Yeah, been in storage.
Yeah, it'd been sitting under a pile of furniture blankets and in the dark, which is actually, ironically, the best thing that could have happened for the oil paint to cure properly. So that thing is now in tip-top shape, better than some of my canvases. But it's taken me this long to recognize the significance of what Ry and I put together. I see how it was worth every moment of its both agony and ecstasy. But I also see now how it's more relevant today than it was in 2008, 2007.
Yes.
This is a story I can't emphasize enough that, you know, rings true in this country, in a city like this, at a moment like this. This is the moment for this work to be out in the world. And it's amazing the way the universe works that way, you know, sort of beyond your control, and you just got to trust in the work and allow it to have its own life once you let go of it.
What else I was been struck by, even coming here to see the exhibit a few months back, right after it opened, is just to stand in the gallery and listen to people talk as they stand around this truck, as if they are standing in the neighborhood, and they are telling stories about their families and about the neighborhood and about what's happening now and what happens and what might happen in the future. Did you realize, I mean, have you been able to stand and listen to these conversations yourself about you know, people keeping their families alive? I mean, their histories are alive. That having this object, it makes it a living thing. It is like having a neighborhood where people are gathering around and talking.
It's almost as good.
Almost.
I'll tell you this one. When the truck was first seen in the Peterson Automobile Museum down the street, there was a lowrider show and the Dukes had some cars. So they wanted to include the ice cream truck. That was 20 years ago now. So a lot of people were coming to see the cars, and it was all kind of different stuff. And I spent a lot of time during the day listening to just what you're saying, listening to people. And some folks came and said, "Oh, I thought Dodger Stadium had always been there, and we didn't know about this," and so forth. But then along came this woman. She came down to the museum with her grandfather's .22 squirrel gun rifle, old rusty. She said, "My grandfather stood at the door when the bulldozers came over the edge, with the gun. He was going to stand them off with this squirrel gun. Here, take it, and maybe you can use it." Well, we put it in the truck. We mounted it, or placed it in the cab somehow so it could be seen. So that kind of thing, is absolutely fantastic. Artifact, this sort of treasure. There are pictures. There's one particular photograph of these huge earth movers coming over and the people watching this thing. Like, it's absolutely an insane invasion of these machines. And this one family, of course, wouldn't budge. They didn't sell out. Right. And by the way, the families still get together. They're in connection with each other, and they're ongoing generations. I happen to know. What I wanted to do when the truck was done was put food in it and take it to one of their barbecues that they have and just park it and say, "Here," but we can't have it in the sunlight.
I remember Ry and I were actually conversing about, we were determined. Ry was going to purchase a Good Humor uniform, the hat, the bow tie. And we were going to cruise this thing up to a game night at Dodger Stadium, and he was going to step out of the truck, open the back of that freezer box, hand out free ice creams and CDs to tell the story, to educate people. And I was so in for this, and then I think once we both figured out how much time and money was invested, we're like, no, that's not going to happen. But Fernando Ruelas, the godfather of the Dukes, would walk in, and he was absolutely convinced every time that he'd walk in to maintain the truck in the studio. He was so convinced that I was sneaking it out at night and cruising it around Boyle Heights in the streets, going through the drive-thrus at In-N-Out. I was like, "Fernando, I don't even know how to drive this thing." "No, I know. I see the oil dripping. I know you're taking it out, Vince."
Do you have Fernando picture there?
Oh, yeah, let's
It's
see
in here
him
somewhere. Yeah.
He was fantastic.
Really a fantastic.
He was great.
I'll show a little.
Once he got a hold of the idea, man, everybody, I was made an honorary Duke member.
One of the things that would happen was that visitors that would come by, friends, other artists, strangers even at times, would come into the studio, and I would hand some of them a razor blade. And, I had this dilemma on the back of the truck, as you see here, these columns with the bolts that bound that box together. I'll play it again. And I could never figure out quite what to do with it. And then it dawned on me one day that that's all right, that I could turn them into telephone poles, and I would hand people a razor blade, Ry and his family included, but everybody from Little Willie G, to the musicians Olene, to neighborhood residents in Boyle Heights and East LA would come in, and they would etch in their name, their tags on that, so that they were forever a part of the retelling of this history. And it really became a shrine, a memorial on wheels in that way. Yeah. There's so many amazing names etched into that piece of work forever. Everybody from Via Selman's amazing artist, all the way down to the Dukes themselves. And
yeah, you all can see that when you go in to look at it. You'll look at the signatures. It's terrific. It's neat. You'll see.
I wanted to go back to talk about, again, the puzzle of putting the truck together and making it look like a Good Humor truck. The Dukes were very resourceful. The Ruelas were very resourceful. I know that you and Fernando were talking regularly, as was Vincent, with Vincent. Can you tell me a little bit about how they put that truck together to make it tip-top?
Well, first of all, they had the truck. You saw the picture of it in the beginning here in the yard down on 41st and Long Beach Boulevard. So the question in the family, as Fernando says, we had to discuss this and all agree that the truck, that you could have the truck and do what you're going to do. Because some of the members of the family apparently had other ideas for it. So no, they all agreed, this is fine, this is going to be interesting, it'll be worth doing. It's something important. They got the, you know, they wanted to do it, wanted to help me. So I bought it. It was a nice truck. There wasn't anything wrong with it. It just hadn't run in a long time, but it wasn't rusty and it wasn't wrecked or anything. The key thing about it, everybody should know that Good Humor used to buy truck chassis from Chevrolet and cowl forward. In other words, the fenders, the hood, and nothing else. There was no top, and the box was made by Good Humor, and they didn't have doors. They had this sweeping. You'll notice that the sheet metal from the front, the cowl, we say, let's say the windshield back to the rear fender, is a rolled piece of steel that was fabricated. So Vince would have more room to paint on. I said, man, we can't have open doors. We have to have, he's got to be able to do this. You got to have square inches and feet to paint everything that he's going to paint. So we had to maximize. And the box had to be built. That was done by a movie set carpenter. It's tremendously heavy. But he had to have the dimensions just so it would fit within the car. You know, it had to fit the car. It had to slot in there, you see. If it was an inch too wide, no good. Or too long, no good. You can't do it. And then Fernando was very particular about accessories, door brackets for the bumper. You had to have the little, not aftermarket, but deluxe. We had the chrome bumpers. What did he do? He took it to a chrome shop, all nickel, he says to me, high nickel content. I said, right, I can't stand shiny chrome. It looks like hell. High nickel content, very important. So we used to talk about that kind of stuff. It was really great for me. I like that kind of thing, you know, car details. And the size of the tire and the wire wheels, that all had to be straightened out. And it took a long time to get this physically right. And the motor had to be rebuilt, and of course, you know, naturally.
That's
and,
great.
The aftermarket steering wheel, I'm sure some of you will appreciate.
Ry, can you share with us one of your favorite Fernando memories?
Well, I'll tell you what, he, in his way, had this tremendous knowledge, Fernando did. I mean, he knew everything about these cars, and he had built lowriders, and brother Ernie, who's here, had worked on these cars for other people. See, he had the shop, and they had a paint spray booth and everything. And so they built a lot of cars for other people as well as their own cars. So he had a lot of knowledge. He'd done this so many times, and he would teach me things. And the one thing he wanted me to know about, he didn't like, you know, when they bounce, the hydraulic. He didn't like that. He said it's no good because it ruins the frame and it knocks all the body panels out of alignment, and then the gaps between the doors and the sheet metal is wrong, and you have to, you know. And he hated Bondo. He didn't want it. He cannot have that. We have 50 lead files, and I'll file it, and it'll be okay. And so I would listen to him talk, and I would like, this feels so good, especially about the engines. You want a 261 in there? Because a 261 had, I think it was another main bearing or something. This is only a 216 engine. 235. Excuse me. See, I'm forgetting my lessons. But he said to me, always a 261, but it's hard to get. They only made it for 2 years and stuff like that. So I used to go to his house in La Habra Heights and just listen to him talk.
Yeah.
And it would be like a meditation almost, you know. And we'd drink coffee and he'd talk, you know. But he loved the truck, and he really got into it, and he thought, of course, Vincent was a genius.
Yeah.
He wanted Vincent to paint. He said, I'll empty the pool, and you'll paint La Virgen on the bottom of the pool. So he had plans for Vincent.
That's all he ever wanted me was paint the Virgen at the bottom of his pool so that airplanes, when they flew overhead, they can see the Virgen. That's not really my thing, Fernando, but okay.
No, he had ideas.
He did.
Oh,
Did he
yes.
have ideas for the truck, for what you should be doing with the truck too?
That's good. I don't think so. You know, every time that Fernando came into my studio, it was like a whirlwind, like a tsunami force. It was his space. And so I always had to kind of back away, let him do his thing. And every single time, Ry, I don't think you were ever there to experience this, but every time without fail, it became like this running joke with him. I made the tragic mistake one time early on. He forgot some tools of his, and he said, Vince, I need some tools. I need to borrow your tools. I was like, I don't have tools. Like, I had a little cheap set from IKEA to build my bed up in the loft, and I stupidly handed him this thing, and he thought it was he never let me live it down. He's, what the hell is this? Look, Vincent calls these tools, and I was so embarrassed. And so every time he showed up, where are your tools? Where are your tools? Let me see that tool set, that little toy set. But he never, you know, I think that it was such him and I were such opposite worlds in many ways, right? And so he would walk in, he'd look at the progress and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty good, Vince, but maybe add a little bit more blue there, you know? And it was always amazing to just watch him do his thing and watch him in conversation with, you know, his boys and brothers. Oh, it was, I'll never forget it. It really was something special. I mean, it was a whole world. And I think it really it captured like the last remnants of this old world in some ways, right? Yes. That is, you know, in many ways gone forever. Yeah. Just the way that they saw the world and the way they thought about the world. It was really I'll forever cherish it.
This actually is perfect segue into the last question I have for you, which is, again, when I was rereading the article and you were talking about your experience here in Los Angeles, like coming back and forth and in the reading and falling, and you said, you know, you sort of fell in love with the spirit of the people here, and this sort of ability to fight back, and this sort of, you know, that was beyond the cliches about Los Angeles. You were able to go deeper and into history. How do you, and I know you come back now, and can you talk a little bit about your current relationship to LA and what you think about it now?
You know, back then, I moved here. Ry brought me out in 2004. I assumed that I would do the project and head straight back for Texas, and ended up staying until about 2010 or 11. Yeah. Ry and I did a few other projects after the Chavez Ravine together. And so I just, you know, LA's a raging river. Once you step in, it just sort of, you got to be ready for the ride. But it was a really important thing for me to step out of it for, 10 plus years. I went back to San Antonio, then moved to Houston, and then just recently moved back here again, 20 years later. And ironically, I live in the very same place now where I painted the truck at Chavez Studios in Boyle Heights. So it's this amazing, strange, roundabout way to go. And but I think the thing that really connected with me back then was at Boyle Heights, the community of Boyle Heights in East LA, reminded me so much of home in the south side of San Antonio. Yeah. The communities, the people, the families, right? The camaraderie that was recognizable to me, was familiar to me, it's familiar territory, so I never felt out of place. Yeah. But not an easy city. I remember Ry once wrote me a note and said, LA sure is a tough city, you'll see.
Yeah.
Right? And I always kept that close to me. Stepping out and then coming back in, I can't help but think of figures that have played an important role for you, like Mike Davis, who in the City of Quartz talk about LA being the city that in many ways echoes what the future of America will become. Is sort of ground zero. And I think the thing that draws me back in, LA is a seductress, right? She pulls you in and keeps you here. Temptress. It's a city that lives on the edge. It loves to live on the edge. Earthquakes, right? Fires, homelessness, LAPD, Disney World, right? And I remember when I went back to Texas, I was haunted by this image. I used to go to this taco spot, I forget where, maybe in Highland Park or Eagle Rock. What's that? Yeah, exactly. And I was sitting there one morning, and I was eating my taco. There was nobody inside. I was all by myself, and I was watching this woman jogging, just strolling past, and then I watched a man walking his 2 poodles, and right behind the entire time in broad daylight, the hill's on fire. And I just remember thinking, this is not normal. Nowhere else would this be normal. But it is, and here we are. And I think in that way, that's, as an artist, that's where it pulls, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in, That's right. I can't get away from the idea of being at the epicenter of what is yet to come, that's sort of reverberating like an earthquake throughout the rest of the United States in the 21st century. And for me, that is a really important thing. I think the city, Ry was absolutely correct. The city is in rough shape. It is a city on the edge. Yeah. It is a tough town. But like in every community, no matter where you're at, you find your people.
Yes.
You stay close to them.
Yes.
And you help each other. That's it. That's all you've got.
Yeah.
And for me, that's enough.
Yeah. And that's, I'm going to say, it's beautiful, and that's the beauty of this room tonight. I see people I have known for decades. We've figured out there's magical intersections between people we know. I had said to, when I met Ernie for the very first time all those years ago, it turns out that my mother was his junior high school teacher. Fernando and Ernie's junior high school teacher, and my mother remembered both of them. This city is beautiful. It's hard. It is, I get frustrated. I'm shaking my fist in it often and like, I gotta get out of here. And then there are moments like this. So thank you for honoring the ghosts and the present and guiding us to the future. Thank you for this idea that started all